Thank you very much, Dr. Dua. And as I was saying earlier, this is part of a project that my organization, the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, is bringing out in collaboration with the Hans-Seydig-Stiftung India. And what we're trying to do is to arrive at a more detailed understanding of what India-EU cooperation could look like across various sectors. Now, what we've seen so far is that there are wider recommendations for closer cooperation, but more often than not, I think the detail or the granular understanding of, specifically how this translates in practice is missing in certain areas. Now, of course, we know that health is a very important part of this conversation. It's been prioritized within the framework of the strategic partnership as well. And I greatly appreciate your unique insight as chairman of the Pharmaceutical Export Promotion Council in helping to take this project forward. Before we begin, I will put out a disclaimer, which is that I arrived at this topic as an outsider. So I'm really more of an interested generalist, if you will. So I will look to you to set the tone and substance of the discussion. And I hope to be able to ask the right questions. And to kick things off, what I'd like to do is ask a fundamental question, which is, how has this pandemic impacted India's health sector landscape? Has it at all induced a reconsideration of priorities within the industry?
Thank you very much, Ruhee. It's a very, very contemporary question. And in fact, every crisis, like that we are facing after 102 years of Spanish flu, where close to about 50 million deaths were reported, 20 million deaths were reported under the British India. After that, this is the second pandemic of its nature, which does not have that, gravity of fatalities, for sure. But hopefully it comes under control and we get out of it and don't ever even envision those numbers that we witnessed when none of us were born 102 years ago, there was. Right? So I consider COVID-19 for the healthcare sector of India as a great opportunity. Let's look at it from two perspectives. One is our domestic infrastructure for healthcare. And the second is from a pharmaceutical standpoint, where my expertise comes in terms of being the chairman of Pharmaceutical Export Promotion Council, reporting into the Ministry of Commerce, Honorable Dynamic Cabinet Minister of Commerce and Industry. Let's first get on to healthcare. India spends barely about 2% of its GDP on healthcare, as compared to anything between 5 to 8% the world over. Even if you take less developed countries, developing countries, the amount of expense in percentile to the GDP is reasonably high as compared to India. So that's one struggle we've always been having with the government of India, to increase allocation of the resources as a percentile of GDP, point one. Of course, having said that, I must qualify this, that over the last 6 years or thereabouts of the present disposition of this government, the healthcare expenditure has been increasing, and there have been certain pivotal decisions which are game changers, like Ayushman Bharat. It's one of the most dynamic decisions this government has ever taken. The size and magnitude of this is one of the biggest in the world, which will take care of almost around 5 crore poor families below the poverty line. So that opens up a huge new vista of healthcare coverage by the institutions, by the government. Right? Similarly, Jan Aushadhi scheme, which came prior to Ayushman Bharat, has not been such a resounding success, but it was a step in the right direction, unfortunately not implemented properly. And per capita availability of hospital beds, per capita availability of primary health centers, care, and other vital statistics of the country indicate that there's so much more to do, primarily because of a huge population of 1.3 billion people in this country. Right? So therefore, the future bodes very well in terms of the needs of the country. And there couldn't have been a better occasion or opportunity to assess your underbelly in terms of your infrastructure than COVID-19. Suddenly, I mean, we've been talking about it, everybody talks about it, right? But nobody looks in terms of the micros. Macros, you can speak anything in state, anything and everything, and everybody listens from here, lets it go from there. Something gets registered, something. But when this pandemic came up, everybody started going into the micros, right up to the village level. So to that extent, it's been an eye-opener, and I'm very happy to say that the government has responded enormously vigorously to make sure that they, to the extent possible, they do. And don't forget that our fatality rate is one of the lowest. As of this morning, it's 1.2%, as compared to 3 to 4% in the US, Europe, and elsewhere in the world, Mexico, for example, right? Our recovery rate has gone beyond 90% in COVID, right? So this has not happened overnight. This has happened in collaboration with the central government, the state government, the union territories, because we have a federal structure, and of course the private industry, both in hospitals, primary health centers, as well as, of course, pharmaceuticals in a very, very defining way. So that's the healthcare part of it. And COVID has been an opportunity to assess, rework, reskill people. I mean, look at the fact that we did not have any PPE manufacturers in the country. We did not have mask manufacturing facilities in the country. We did not have vendors in this country. Today, very proud to tell you that we are one of the largest exporters of all the 3 or 4 medical equipments of PPE. I mean, it's magic, which happened in 6 months' time at the clarion call of the Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji, Mr. P.D. Waghela, the Department of Pharmaceuticals, ex-secretary, Ministry of Health, Love Agarwal, and so on and so forth. So it's been an enormous job which has happened in being aware of the deficiencies in the infrastructure, responding to that, medical devices, and of course, pharmaceuticals. I mean, the whole world knows when we come to pharmaceuticals. We supply approximately 206 out of 215 countries in the world, right? And we control close to about 30% plus market share of the world. In the United States, every third pill, every second injectable is provided by Indian generic companies. There are close to about 200 odd companies in the US which supply to the essential needs of generics, right? And holding a 40% market share of very high quality US FDA approved facilities, right? At highly accessible and affordable price. There's a Herculean effort where India has eminently succeeded. There's no other country in the world which can compete with India in terms of supplying very high quality medicines at extremely economical prices. And countries like US, Europe, Japan, Korea, South Africa, Mexico, Brazil, just to name a few, Turkey, they've saved multiple billions and millions of dollars in healthcare expense, all because of it. India today has the largest number of US FDA approved plants, including off late the plants located in the United States. We have the largest filings of ANDAs, abbreviated new drug applications, for formulation, for APIs, for drug master files, both in Europe and in the US. Now, what else would you look forward to? I'm very proud to tell you, and you are aware, the media is agog with the news that we were the first country who, after taking care of adequacy of hydroxychloroquine in India, for that matter, went over to the world and supplied 240 countries, out of which 40 countries were supplied pro bono, free of cost, because they could not afford it. And second was paracetamol, same situation there, right? And ibuprofen and so many other COVID-related medications. COVID, initially was a setback for the pharmaceutical industry in India because of lockdown, but then we gradually got out of it, worked very closely with Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Health, my own ministry, Ministry of Commerce, as well as Ministry of Fertilizers and Chemicals, because APIs are fall under them, and work 24/7 to make sure that not only in India there is adequacy of the pharmaceutical formulations and APIs, but there's adequacy from a perspective of the whole world for that matter. So broadly speaking, the answer is that COVID-19 has been a blessing in disguise for this country, not in the real sense of the word, but the fact that India has woken up to its realities. We've found that in the Indian formulation domestic industry, which is $21 billion, vertically divided, $21 billion worth of exports and $21 billion worth of domestic industry, both growing at anything between 10 to 15% CAGR over the last 5 years. But unfortunately, the domestic Indian formulation industry is extremely vulnerably dependent for APIs, which is bulk pharma, for key starting raw materials and for intermediates to the extent of 95%. So that's been another wake-up call for India for COVID-19. And we are very grateful to the Prime Minister, his cabinet, and of course, people who are totally involved in this pharmaceutical business, Department of Pharmaceuticals, right, which is headed by the new Honorable Secretary, Miss S. Aparna, that we've got a stimulus of $1.5 billion in APIs, KSMs to be Atmanirbhar, be self-sufficient, self-reliant, and in medical devices to the extent of $500 million. So this bodes very well. For last 10 years, we've been pursuing all governments, including this government also, but because of certain constraints, it could not happen. But now it's happened, thanks to COVID. And I'm sure going forwards in about 5 years' time, we'll be fully self-reliant. And in about another 7 years' time, we would give our neighbor a run for their money, which we did in the early 2000s and late 90s, but fell off the cliff because the neighboring country took over the whole world, not only in India, and displaced us very conveniently from number one position. Now, another factor that you must realize is that whereas we import $2.8 billion worth of APIs, KSMs, as well as intermediates, we export $4 billion worth of APIs to the regulated markets because China cannot compete with us there. Their capability to face audits is next to nothing, zero. Their capability to submit good dossiers which can pass the muster in US, Europe, Japan, etc., is very low. In fact, they've employed Indian professionals to help them do that, but so far they've not succeeded. But that doesn't mean that we should be complacent. We should be aware that China is a huge giant, a neighboring country is a huge giant, and they can upstage you at any point in time. So checks and balances have to be created. We have to make sure that we don't fall off the cliff once we get there in the next 5 years' time.
Thank you, Dr. Dua. And I completely get why you identify this as a silver lining in terms of, a reassessment of India's own capabilities. And it allows me to segue to a broader discussion of cooperation within the India-EU context. And, I was reading that most of the European Union's, pharmaceuticals and medical equipment are sourced from 4 countries: Switzerland, the United States, United Kingdom, and China. Now, in terms of the pandemic having intensified demonstration of India's potential with specific regard to the health sector, I wonder also, in terms of the discussions on global supply chains, you brought up China, of course. I wonder what is the diversification potential keeping India in mind, and what are the shall we say, unique selling points that India has to offer, as well as the unique selling points that the European Union can offer to India. And of course, with regard to India, you have already spoken somewhat about domestic manufacturing capability, vaccine production, etc. But just going forward, what this could look like, and also what the cooperation within the health sector between India and EU has looked like so far.
So, Ruhee, first of all, let me complete what I started off with in response to the first question. It's not only pharmaceuticals, as you rightly pointed out, it's also vaccines. We are the largest vaccine manufacturers of the world. We are the largest suppliers of vaccines to WHO and UNICEF, right? And we work practically with anybody and everybody in the world over for vaccines, right? All kinds of vaccines, right? India is polio-free, as you know very well. DPT, measles, hepatitis B. These vaccines are available at a fraction of a cost when compared to the other manufacturers in other parts of the world. So vaccine is done amazingly well. You have Serum Institute, which is the largest vaccine producer of the world. You have biological advance, you have Bharat Biotech, you have Zydus Cadila. You go on and on and on, right? And I'm extremely confident, Nabbi, that out of the 5 companies in India which are in the forefront of COVID-19 vaccine, I put my money on all of them being front runners amongst the top 10. First and foremost, of course, is Oxford, Serum, and AstraZeneca combined, right? So that is going to come through. Bharat Biotech is most promising. They are in phase 3 trials now. He's a dear friend of mine, Dr. Krishna Ella, amazing professional, right? He's producing intranasal vaccine, right? Very, very unique. And then you have biological events with Novavax and Moderna collaboration. And then you have Zydus Catalyst stand on. And believe you me, I'm putting my money on all of them to make sure they're in the top 10 to hit the vaccine market. And that'll be hopefully the beginning of the end of or culmination of this COVID-19 pandemic. Now, let's come on to what you said. You know, in terms of pharma, the collaboration, I'm sure you're aware that on the 15th, there was a day-long deliberation between India on a government-to-government. And for the first time, both the governments and the industry, I was invited there. There were a couple of other industry leaders also who were invited on that. So we've had this day-long deliberation. And all points were discussed threadbare on the 15th, and minutes of the meeting were drawn. And it was a very productive session from going from last time to this time. There was a vast improvement. Of course, I would say that the success rate of these negotiations, both on the pharma front and medical devices front, has been hardly about 50%. But covering from 10, 15% to 50% also is a stupendous achievement. And I must be grateful to the Department of Pharmaceuticals, Secretary, Joint Secretary, Mr. Renwa, who is like a general on the front, both in COVID situation, as well as facilitating this Indo-European dialogue, European Commission dialogue, and of course his deputy, Sumit Garg, Undersecretary, who did a great job in putting it all together along with the EU representative and made sure things happen. So that's point one. Pharma is happening significantly and on the right track. We do an ex-factory commerce of close to about a little over $3 billion, growing at about 5-6% as compared to US, which is $7 billion, at about 10%. So there is that need to go further. You know, complications in EU, India, bilateral trade and commerce is basically Europe is very complicated. Let's be honest about it. You know, there are 27 European states. UK is now deflected and gone away, and now we are reinventing the wheel. So one of the biggest problems that we have to live with, that it's only until 31st December that majority of our filings are in UK, because UK is a natural ally. The language suits us, the people suit us. We're fully aware of the regulatory landscape and things happen like this, you know. But unfortunately, after that, multiple $1 million are going to be spent, or euros are going to be spent in complying with EU nations. And mind you, all of the EU nations have a waiting period of 9 to 12 months. So what's going to happen after MHRA disaccreditation from EU and re-accreditation by one of the EU states is anyone's guess. This can lead to complications of, number one, lack of availability in Europe. Europe is 30% dependent on India, right? So they will have to work out ways and means to make sure that either they extend or they expedite the approvals and more so, you see, with COVID-19, physical visits not going to be possible. So you'll have to do a desktop audit, review the documentation, very substantial, voluminous documentation, very quickly. And mind you, outside of 4-5 European nations, the rest of the nations have a problem of language. So this was explained to them. They don't have a ready-made solution, but I'm sure they walked away with wonderful messages that, look, this needs to be sorted out. Second, and the most important problem in pharmaceuticals, I'll come to medical devices later, pharmaceuticals is that every batch of any medicine, any drug that goes out of India has to wait for 2 to 3 months, because every batch, sample has to be taken and it's got to be analyzed. And it's not like India that analysis happens like this. No, it doesn't. It takes 2 to 3 months. So the drug sits out there and you have problem of expiration, because then the shelf life goes down to the extent of 2 to 3 months. Plus this huge amount of working capital which is stuck. Now look at US. US take all the US FDA approved facilities, right, accredited facilities. They take the certificate of analysis of the company concerned, and as and when they feel appropriate, they take random samples and the analysis goes on. In US, I don't have to wait for more than 3-4 days or a week at worst case scenario before my consignment goes and gets released. So they will not have a problem. Europe definitely has a problem. Here again, they did not have a definitive solution to the problem. I will be very honest with you. They were telling us on a government to government basis that we want you to graduate into learning the European CGMP, kind of landscape, and make sure that once you come up to speed on API, then we'll approve you. And formulation will be even beyond to, come on, have a heart. Tell me, we have the largest number of Indian companies in formulation and APIs outside of EU, which are approved by EU. So are you telling me that you need to teach the industry, which is already a predominant, dominating player in Europe? So if they know it, they can collaborate with the government. So have a tripartite agreement where Indian industry, which is successful in Europe, and they are eminently successful, right? Along with European Union Commission and along with Indian regulators. And within 6 months to a year's time, you should be through with API as well as formulation approval by the EU. So this is a very big pain point, which as of today remains completely unresolved. So that's the pharmaceutical part. My sense is if all goes well, things normalize and it becomes smooth, seamlessly smooth, in the interest of both the continents, that's India versus EU, then this business could grow multiple folds to the extent of about 10 to 15%, as is the case with the US. Now let's come to medical devices. In medical devices, like APIs and KSM, we are vulnerably dependent, unlike pharma, not on China, but on, in the pecking order, US, Germany, Netherlands, Taiwan, and of course, China to some extent. China is about hardly 10% or so. Rest is all Europe and US. Now here, there is this new PI scheme which has come, the Production Linked Incentive, PLI scheme, which has earmarked $500 million, close to about 4,000 Indian rupees, to make sure that you start manufacturing the medical devices in India. The focus is basically on inviting the global behemoths like Medtronics, like Thermo Fisher, like Philips, whole host of them who control the world, to come and set up shop here and start manufacturing. Obviously, when they come here, there are going to be multiple mushrooming of other Indian manufacturers who will then take on. My sense is, give it about another 6 to 7 years, and we should be self-sufficient, and we should start exporting as well on the medical devices. But we have to cover a huge, long distance for the medical devices to happen, as compared to pharma, where it's just the KSM APIs and the intermediate, and our chemistry prowess, and our knowledge, our intellect, our regulatory capabilities in pharma API are so humongous that I'm confident that in 5 years' time, we'll be able to nudge out China from where they are today.
Thank you, Dr. Dua. I had asked at this time for the potential, but you so skillfully wove both potential and the barriers to actualizing cooperation together. In that regard, I'm wondering whether you would like to speak at all on the relevance of a free trade agreement to these discussions. Of course, we know that have been going on, they have been stalled, it's a very temperamental thing. Now, I understand, of course, that it has its advocates, but I also recognize that within the health sector particularly, detractors as well, based on how it could impact the Indian health landscape. So,
very good question. It's a very, very important question. This initiative has been gaining dust over the last 1 decade or thereabouts, whereas EU has these kind of agreements, FTA agreements with a lot of countries. Yeah, particularly in healthcare, it's not working out, and the reasons are very clear. There are no meeting points in there. There is an issue about intellectual property. There is an issue about evergreening of the patents, right? There is an issue about special protection certificate, SPC as we call it. In SPC, it's an amazing unilateral stand that Europe has taken, stating that look, after the extended part of the patent, right, extension part of the patent gets over, then you have to set a pace in Europe to make manufacturing of that particular molecule in Europe. Now, I cannot do that, obviously, because my cost advantage, huge cost advantage, my overheads and a whole host of other things, if I set up shop in Europe, is completely lost, right? So you have to revisit, you have to be, flexible along with India. India needs to be flexible as well. And of course, Europe needs to be flexible. So there are three major issues of intellectual property: evergreening the patents, SPC protection, which need to be sorted out before we can even think of a free trade agreement. But I think with UK now, getting offside of EU would be under increasing pressure, particularly for the healthcare sector, to work out an FTA. But it's your guess is as good as mine in terms of when actually this is going to happen. I think this is one area where both the countries, both the continents have suffered. And sooner we do it, the better it is. It's in the domain of Honorable Commerce and Industry Minister as well as his counterparts from the EU Commission to make sure. I mean, we are that much far and that much behind, in terms of getting there, and suddenly it collapses and goes back to where you started off. It's pretty unfortunate, but neither are is that we expedited to the extent possible. But unless these contentious issues, three of them, which I named just a little while ago, need to be sorted out. Otherwise, there's no meeting ground at all for an FTA, particularly in healthcare segment. India needs EU in a big way in medical devices. EU needs us in a defining way in generics. So why are we sticking to our positions, which are very unfortunate?
Right. We've had a very wide-ranging conversation, Dr. Dua, and this has been pretty much like sitting in a classroom for me, receiving a crash course. So thank you very much. But before we, bring this to a complete close, I'd like to ask you if you were to identify a set of recommendations, shall we say, for the short, medium, and long term, in terms of India-EU health cooperation, what would those be? And I understand I might be putting you on the spot here, but this would be very helpful for us in terms of taking the project forward.
Sure. See, first and foremost, there's huge amount of innovation which sits in EU, mind you. They're fantastic companies. I started my career with Höchst in Germany, which is now known as Sanofi Aventis, right? And similarly, there are multiple Sanofi Aventises out there in Europe. So we need to reach out to the academia out there in Europe. We are a behemoth in the generic part of the world, but we are a pygmy, if you permit me to use the word, in innovation. We are not scratching the surface of innovation. And innovation is the biggest piece of healthcare, anywhere, particularly life sciences, maybe biological, maybe pharmaceuticals. So there is huge depth which is sitting out there both in US and Europe in particular, where we can leverage it. And if there is an agreement, bilateral agreement between the institutions and the industry, I think it will take India to the next stratosphere of innovation where, like generics or renovation, as I call it very fondly, could be overtaken by innovation. India, you've heard of Sushruta. He was the father of surgery in the world, globally speaking. You've heard of Dham. You've heard of so many other great scientists who did things in the innovation space, in healthcare as well as non-healthcare. If you can do it there centuries ago, why can't we do it now, right? So therefore, there is a huge need of getting together institutionally and walking the talk in terms of innovation, point one. Point two is Europe needs us more than ever before because their healthcare expenses are going up big time. And during COVID times, what's been happening. So they need to fork out a mutually compatible FTA to make sure that they further save hugely and significantly. My sense is 30% is just not good. They should increase market share of Indian generics, good quality, excellent, affordable and accessible drugs to the extent of 60%. They will save billions of euros, and that'll help them to further evolve on infrastructure in the healthcare sector. So it is a win-win scenario between the two continents, the two nations, if you take EU as a nation, to make sure that we work together on innovation space with Europe. We help them on the generic space. We help them. They're biological innovators of a very high magnitude, right? So we leverage them because we have an intellectual property right paradigm, IPR paradigm, right, which is fantastic. It gives you an opportunity in the generic space. It also protects your product intellectual property, right, the patent that you have and process patent that you have. You're fully compatible with WTO. So that being said, on the biosimilar part, which is the next wave of economizing the biological innovator products after the patent is expired, the prices can come down to 10 to 20% of the originator price after patent expiration. Imagine that, for leukemia, I'll just give you one example and you'll understand where I'm coming from. Leukemia, the cost of treatment of Novartis, right? Gleevec, imitinab is the generic name of the biological product, which is in biosimilar space, and there are 3 manufacturers from India who manufacture it. In China, the cost of treatment was 100,000 US, and a poor farmer, basically, there's a movie called Dying to Survive. Please do see that, and you'll understand where I'm coming from. Dying to Survive, the English version. Here was a farmer from China who was detected with blood cancer, leukemia. He was told that the cost of treatment is 100,000 from Gleevec, right? And he obviously didn't have the money, and the state obviously would not kind of subsidize it at all. So he had a friend in Hong Kong who was involved in the pharmaceutical business, particularly imports and exports. He reached out to him. He was a friend of his. He in turn reached out to Ratco, a wonderful company out there in Hyderabad. And he was given this medicine, imitinab, at 10% of the cost of Gleevec. So and that too was given free of cost, if I understand correctly, on humanitarian ground by the promoters of NATCO, Mr. Mapineni, Rajiv Mapineni. He gave it free of cost on humanitarian ground, and look and behold, within about 9 months' time, the guy was up and about, right? He was cured, right? Even if he had to pay, it was 10% of the cost of the innovator, right? In the generic space. And then it spread like wildfire because one of the movie producers got to know about it. He interviewed him and created a movie, one of the biggest blockbuster movies in China, right? It's there on YouTube, you can see that. So I'm just trying to give you an example to tell you how much more Europe can benefit from biosimilars and save 90% of the cost that they're spending on biosimilars and almost around 30 to 40% of the generic space. So imminent need for Europe to come forward, India to come forward in the innovation space, and you'll have a great amalgam going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Dua. I've had several takeaways, as I pointed out earlier, from this conversation. But one of the most interesting ones for me is that in addition to the anticipated structural and institutional barriers, there are several cultural barriers as well. And you mentioned recommendation for interdisciplinarity. And the point of this project that we're doing is interdisciplinarity as well. And I'm grateful to you for your deep industry expertise in setting, I think, the anchors for what our policy understanding as well as, the way we would like to take the project forward or to look like. So thank you very much.